Now, before we actually do our SASS, our global SASS file, we need to look into a little bit more about Vue. And if you do a search for vue.config.js, you can see here I already clicked this, configuration references. And in here, there's a file called, they talk about something called vue.config here, .js. And this is where we can kind of manipulate how the system works behind the scene when it's doing a build and doing things and putting everything together and so on. We're going to use this for two things as starters, for global SASS and changing the build path once we get a little bit further in. Now, what we want to do is we want to do a global SASS file. So I did a search for, because I didn't know how to do it, I did a search for how to do import SASS to all components, and I ended up with on CSS tricks because they're totally awesome. And I went through some of the things here, and I actually explained specifically what I needed to do, and it works. So that's great. So we're going to do similar things now. I can jump down quite a bit because I already did all this installing here, and that's what we did the git clone for, and we already created some SASS here that we're going to copy paste. But down here at the JavaScript part, it talks about how we need to create a vue.config.js file. Now, once we do this, we need to make sure the file, as they state, is on the same level as your package.json file here. So we're just going to create this now. So go to your Visual Studio Code and make sure you are not inside the view, this one or this one. So we want it to be at the same specific place as this one, right? Oops, I clicked this one wrong. So I'm just clicking below here, so I'm not in any sort of folder. And just make sure, if you have no room, just make them smaller. And then we need to do a new file called vue.config.js. And again, it's super important this file is at the same position as this one down here. Awesome. Now, going back to this, and again, you can just search for CSS tricks and how to import it, or you can copy specifically what is being written here. I'm just going to copy because I'm totally lazy and explain what they are. So here we're calling it in, so we're telling the system we're going to manipulate with the CSS, and in this case, we're going to be using the SASS part of it, right? And what we want to import for each time or whenever it loads something in is this string here, and that's a path for our variable.scss file where we put all our primary colors or whatever we want to do inside, or if we want to create mix-ins or whatever, right? So this path here is something we need to remember because we need to create somewhere in our system that it can actually go to this and import it for each of our components. So what we want to do is we want to click source and just expand it. And then we want to create a new folder called styles. You can call it something else, just make sure that you then of course also change this path here. And inside styles, we're going to create a file called _variables SCSS. Now, if you want to change this to whatever else, if you change the name here, make sure you change it here of course as well. So let's click save, let's go back to this. Right now this is empty, so boring. But what we want to do is we want to go back to home and we want to take this SASS map here we're just going to copy this or cut this, put this into our variable.sass instead and click save. So let's see if we get an error still here. And we do, and that's probably because we need to do a little reload of the system, because right now we actually did something, we actually created a config file, so something that needs to do have implemented. So what we need to do is we need to stop our current server and do an npm run serve and have everything being built again. So this is being put into each of the components. So in a little bit it's going to be done loading, and hopefully then the system will actually know that once we do this, it's going to use this specific code, and if not, then I forgot to do something. But let's figure that one out. Awesome, it's back. So now we can see I have a working page that actually is changing the colors of this. So if I go back to component 1, instead of using the primary here, I can do the secondary, and that's the blue one, right? And the blue one here. So now we can see my global SASS is actually working, and I can just start implementing into the specific components instead of actually having to do the copying in all the maps to everywhere, which is really not smart. So that's how we set up global CSS into our Vue settings. Now, just a quick note is that hopefully in the next iteration of the next version of Vue, and especially Vuetify, I think they made it so it's possible to use SASS out of the box, Global SASS. Hopefully, I read it, but it might be coming in the middle of I'm going to say middle of 2019, hopefully, with the next version of these. So this might be deprecated in a few months, and if not, then you can still use it, of course. You can still use it for the build one anyway, so which is good. But awesome, now I got an update, so I'm going to stop the video.